Hello, everybody. Welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Jules.
Hello, everyone.
And joined by Josh Brown.
Hello, boys.
Both of you have played one of the most anticipated, long in development games in quite some time. I feel like the original Dead Island was one of the most talked about games of all time. And I feel like one of the secret weapons of this sequel is a lack of expectation, which I kind of want to just hand it over to Mr. Jules, who's been quite blown away by Dead Island 2.
Do you know what, mate? I sat here and I thought, when I saw Dead Island 2 come back around, I was like, surely not. Surely this is the self-fulfilling prophecy that all long gestating games get, where they take ages and ages in the hyperbolic time chamber and they come out all sort of like mangled and looking like help me, please, put me out of my misery. But no, Dead Island 2 is actually really fun. I've had a really good time with it, and I'm sitting here just almost like in utter disbelief because I just thought it was going to be the little engine that couldn't, and yet it turns out that it's very much steamrolled into my heart. I've loved it, and I believe that Josh actually feels the same.
Similarly, I could not believe my eyes, 10 Million Fireflies, that I had more fun in
Owl
the
City
4
reference.
hours or so that I spent with Dead Island 2 than the entire 20-hour campaign of Dying Light 2. Not to compare them, of course, but I couldn't believe just how quickly I was won over. I thought the introduction in particular was very, very strong, both from a narrative and presentation standpoint. Like, I don't love everything about it, but it is what I wanted out of a Dead Island sequel, if that makes sense, because I was a huge fan of the original as well. I thought that got a lot right, and even if this is a little bit overdue, there's a lot in there that really tickled my pickle, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those games where, because no one was expecting anything from it, maybe we could have easily been overwhelmed and blown away by just it being competent, but it really does go out of its way to excel in the few key areas that it's doubled down on. It's not a game that is trying to reinvent the wheels, but it's not one that's also just coasting on prior success either. What's that flesh system?
Yes.
These like fully... Oh, what is it again? I can't remember what the technical name is, but they just came up with a clever acronym just to say that you can basically rip body parts off everything. Like, Scott, you will have an absolute field day picking up a pool cue, ramming it through someone's stomach and turning them into a meat flag. It is ridiculous, like the amount of damage and destruction you can do, because what you do is you hold down your attack button and you get this like circle that grows and grows and grows and starts pulsating with anger, almost like your iris is looking at them saying, I'll have you for dinner next, mate.
Okay.
And then you pick a body part and it will basically do like a little animation where you just clonk them. You actually take like bits of their arms off. You can rip through their shirts or like score their stomach open and watch them disembowel them. You're like, this is disgusting, but in the best possible ways.
So this is the thing. Yeah, you got to talk about the gore system, because like this is the thing that I think they haven't talked that much about. But then obviously some of the most recent gameplay, we'll have loads of B-roll and stuff over this video, has showcased the new gore system, which is kind of Mortal Kombat 11-esque. It's kind of Resident Evil 2-esque. It feels like they're trying to set a bar with like the amount of modeling they've done, from skin to muscle to bone to everything else.
Just to chuck on another story from what Jules was saying there, I was like blown away at one point during my playthrough where I picked up what were essentially Wolverine claws. You get like these three adamantium-style claws that you can put on your fists, and you hold down the attack button, and I just like jab them into a zombie's face, and I just thought, there's something, I've crossed a barrier there, almost. That is almost too much in a way. But you mentioned Resident Evil 2, right? And that's kind of what it reminds me of, like the sort of skin, kind of like in bone and gristle kind of deformation that's in that game and made the zombies so terrifying and monstrous is doubled down upon here. It's kind of a strange way to describe it, but it's almost like next-gen gore physics. The way you can, like Jules is saying, you know, take a shovel to a zombie's face, take off their jaw, and you just have
gross.
like the tongue down. We probably can't show any of this because we'll get demonetized.
That's the thing,
but it's
I'm
an
fascinated
incredible
if this-
level of detail.
If this manages to stay on YouTube, like the amount of B-roll that they'll have given everyone who's had access to this game, I'll be amazed if this is actually visible by anybody by the end of it.
I tell you what, and it's so satisfying to get those moments where you are literally ripping an enemy limb from limb. It's kind of like the kinetic sand of killing. Like, it's so satisfying and weirdly calming because you're like, oh, I've just punched through your head like it was wet cake. Fantastic. On to the next dessert then.
So that's the thing that I'm kind of curious about, because one, I mean, maybe this is just a really obvious thing that I just overlooked. Like, one thing that's in here that I didn't know was in here is the character creator. And the other thing is, I'm just curious, and we should say we're not sponsored by the dudes making this, whose name I've forgotten anyway. We've just had access to the game ahead of time. But still, that idea that there's a character creator, that idea that, you know, it is sort of coming after Dead Island 2, which played things, Dying Light 2, which played things very, very safe. I'm curious what this does that, like, elevates it. You guys mentioned the voice acting being brilliant before we recorded and stuff.
I guess the way, if you are going to compare Dying Light 2 to this game, and as Josh said before, maybe it's not the most apt thing, even though there are some Venn diagram crossovers, I'd say that this is like the Saints Row experience of that. Everything is over the top. Everything is super stylized. Like, the color saturation on everything just makes you feel like it's the Sunset Overdrive sequel you never got. It is super colorful and in your face. And I would say that the characterization that comes from that is really reflected well in the characters that you are given. Like, I played as Danny, one of the Slayers, who's this Irish rockabilly, and she gets her special power is that she gets health regeneration back the more zombies you kill in a chain.
Okay.
So she's got like this mosh pit mentality, getting up close and personal, slamming people with baseball bats and then just moving through the mob. And I love the fact that the voice actress who did that was unbelievable. Like, I can't express how many situations where I genuinely was like, the intonation of that delivery was so pitch perfect that it's funny as hell. Like, her sassy like remarks, her little comebacks, all the way that she calls everyone gals is just absolutely brilliant. I was like, cool, I know I should be playing as other Slayers to sort of run through and see what differences there are, but I fell in love with her character, so I was like, brilliant, that's it, I'm done.
Quickly, like, to that point, like, I know that, like, a lot of us, I mean, me and you, like, everyone has talked about being sick of the MCU, the quippy stuff. Like, even the new Saints Row was, like, too much in that direction, and it sort of took it away from, like, having an identity of its own. Is this just better written in terms of comedic timing or something?
There are yeses and nos here. There was a few points where I was like, I'm questioning the logic behind your actions, as in, why would you tie yourself to these people when you are clearly better at surviving on your own? You're actually weakening yourself by forming a group with a person who, for lack of better words, is a bit of a knob. So you're just like, okay, am I just going to basically be protecting you now for the rest of this game? But the interactions between them, the snarky comebacks, they didn't ever feel like they were overstaying their welcome. They just felt like they were natural pieces of dialogue delivered in a heightened scenario. So, yeah, I didn't feel that there was any sort of like, let's write the joke first and reverse engineer the scenario around it. It was just like, no, this is what somebody with this attitude would say at this time. Okay. There were cringy bits here and there, but I think that's 90% of writing has that nowadays. Like,
yeah, it's definitely sort of, I would agree. Like, the writing itself isn't necessarily my style in terms of how much it does kind of rely on those quips. My character, I'm playing as a Slayer called Amy, who I similarly fell in love with because I think the voice actor is excellent and I really enjoyed the characterization. But Amy did make an okay boomer joke at one point, which I didn't really like much. Gave me the ick a little bit in regards to that character and the writing overall. So it's definitely... It has misses, you know what I mean? It's definitely aiming for that kind of wackier, larger-than-life Saints Row style tone. But I think the characterization and the voice acting and the confidence of that voice acting does ground it a little bit. It's more, actually, for me, in line with something like Dead Rising, something that is kind of like big and kind of goofy and silly, but kind of has that sense of character at the heart of it that makes it a little bit endearing and a little bit more appealing, I suppose.
That's cool.
I'd say that, like, in terms of other aspects of the game that maybe weren't as strong as maybe the presentation and the sound design, were maybe the mission layouts were a bit formulaic, because it was like, go here, get ambushed, fight a wave of zombies, go there, do the same sort of thing, collect this, move that, done. Nothing I hadn't already seen before in a million other games, but it was delivered in a way that the missions felt that they didn't overstay their welcome. Like, in one of the later missions, you're fighting your way up through a hotel, so you're going through different floors that are being collapsed, and they're creating sort of natural obstacles. Elevators open up and zombies spring out from them, so it creates that sense of suspense and tension. And I'm pretty sure that there was a few Left 4 Dead 2, you know, you fight in the hotel at the beginning of the game. I felt like the layout of one of those corridors was exactly like that, as a nice little like homage to it. But then again, it was a generic corridor, so it might not have been that. So.
Okay,
that's interesting, right? Because I do have some faults with the preview that we experienced, but the strongest element by far, and the thing that won me over, was the sense of place and the setting itself. You know, this idea of, you're in LA, you've got the Hollywood sign behind you, literally on fire. That, to me, is incredibly appealing. When it comes to my zombie fiction, I love an early outbreak depiction where things kind of haven't got to the post-apocalyptic trappings that you might expect from The Walking Dead or The Last of Us. As much as I love those presentations, here it's like a lovely glamorous version of sunny LA that is completely blood splattered, and there's something about that I really like. But more importantly, I think it's the level of detail in those environments, because the game isn't open world. You have open areas to explore, but you're going from district to district. But for me, I like that focus more than I like the sprawling, endless open world of other sandbox games or even other zombies games. But here, because they're a little bit smaller, you have that depth of detail, and I was just enjoying going around the mansions that you get in the early game and kind of like looking at the environmental detail that's packed in there and kind of like appreciating the actual design of the environment. I just thought that was really neat and really well realized.
The houses, like you just said, the mansions you can just explore, and they're completely optional. They actually feel like lived-in homes. There's always like a mini story that's being told with the layout of the rooms. Like you might find like a kid's room that's been splattered in blood. You might find a pool that's like being disused, but it's like being connected up to an acidic sewage pump. So it's like spreading all this like toxic, harmful like goop out there. And it's like the environmental storytelling and the variety of locations that we go to, because we only played it, or we were allowed access for the first maybe 4 to 6 hours of the game, and we went through like movie lots, we went through hotels, we went through upper and lower estates, we went into busy sort of sections of like highway, and then there's like bits where explosions had happened, so it was like ruined houses and stuff like that. And I was like, this, for the first 3 levels, effectively, is really impressive in terms of the diversity that you get. And because they were small enough, like Josh was saying, you don't feel like you've got the trappings of the open world formula, where it doesn't feel overwhelming. It feels like you can explore every single nook and cranny of each area and it not feel like an absolute like chore to do so. I never felt like I was going to be backtracking for hours through these boring streets again and again. It was just like, no, cool, I can go here, do everything, and kind of like a weird Tony Hawk style level, I can tick everything off. It's just like, that's the vibe cool. I get for some reason. Like Tony Hawk's like, it's odd.
Well, I feel like if they have like reduced the scope in it a little bit, where it's like a focused level, where it's not just endlessly open, where there's a million, like that whole thing with them, I'm going to get these confused again, but Dying Light 2, where before launch they were like, we have 800 hours of gameplay, and it was like, yeah, but that's going to be finding every single collectible somewhere in this rubble, versus just doing like a semi-open world thing and giving you specific things to do, and designing a game that's actually like made to be finished, and like you said, have a Tony Hawk's approach to the levels. Any closing thoughts for now? This is only a preview for now, and we will hopefully get access to the full game going forward. But
I will say that like the sort of linearity, or like the relative linearity compared to something like Dying Light, initially is exciting, but I wonder how that's going to be supported in the long term. Like Jules was saying, sometimes maybe the missions, which are ultimately stuff we've done before, quite basic or whatever, I wonder whether they like lose the luster as the game goes on. And also, while the core combat itself is satisfying, it definitely feels like a sequel to Dead Island 1 in terms of the game floaty feel. It's a little bit floaty when you swing in the weapons. A lot of the weapons kind of feel the same unless you're doing those big kind of finishing moves. And it's serviceable, but I wonder how it's going to be supported as the game goes on. Even in like the little brief glimpse that we've got of the game, you started unlocking new abilities. One of the earliest ones that I got was a drop kick. You sprint, you jump, you drop kick a zombie in the face, which is very welcome, but that's also been in a bunch of other games as well. You know what I mean? So I just kind of wonder how that core combat evolves, because I think that might make or break it. Ultimately, I'm coming away from the game loving the setting, loving some of the characters, loving the aesthetic, and I like the kind of limited sandbox gameplay, but the actual core thrill of killing zombies, that's kind of bolstered more by the gore effects than it is the actual thrill of the weapons, or the weight of the weapons, or the way they kind of are mechanically, or the way they mechanically work. So I want to see more of that in particular.
I can only echo what Josh is saying here. I think that the setting, sound design, top notch, way above what I expected. And I was playing it on PC as well, so I got to experience it in fluid animation. It's a beautiful looking game. I do feel like the combat is the one thing that holds this game back in the 2012 era, when I think Dead Island first came out. So that's not necessarily a bad thing for what type of game this is, but maybe people going in looking for excessive combos or abilities to elevate it, they're only going to be adding on to a vanilla-y close combat style thing. We weren't able to access firearms at this point, but I know that they exist because characters were beginning to talk about them. So it's whether or not the gun combat will allow that sort of like mix and match ability to really add in that sense of depth. But that's to be found out when we do our later review on this game, I imagine.
Yes.
But the best recommendation that I can give it is that I played it for this time, I walked away from it and wanted to play more of it. So yeah, it would probably be a hearty recommendation right now.
I would say the same thing. You know, I'm very gracious that we got like the previews and stuff, but I was almost playing through it thinking, this is such a surprising experience, and this is satisfying so much of my kind of zombie desires that I didn't expect it to, that I almost wish that I got that experience on launch, because it was kind of like that good, and I wanted to explore these districts a little bit more, but I knew in my head I kind of only had a limited time to get as far through as I could, so I'll have to go back to those when the game actually comes out. But that's quite exciting to leave a preview like this not thinking about, you know, potential issues or potential bugs. And like I said, I don't think the game is necessarily in a 10 out of 10 state right now, but it's very surprising, and it leaves me wanting more. So that's exciting for me and unsurprising for me.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. When you guys both came back saying like, "No, it's brilliant," or "We've had a lot of fun," or "I wasn't expecting this," I was like, "Well, I wasn't expecting this at all," because Dead Island 1 is like one of the most dragged games of all time. So for them to recover is like kind of miraculous in itself. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below of Dead Island 2. You've been following the previews, and what do you want from the game itself? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, joined by Jules Gill.
Thank you very much for having me.
And Josh Brown.
Thank you very much, Scott Telford.
Anytime. Also, all of you, please go subscribe to the What Culture Gaming Podcast, and we'll catch you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.